What it do? I am so happy to be back. I know that it has been a minute since I came out with a video, but life has been lifing in the most beautiful way, and I have truly just tried to focus on being present while also not taking this YouTube too seriously, or I should say social media, because not on YouTube, but on TikTok and Instagram. I get a lot of good feedback, but man, when it's not good, y'all be eating me up. So, anyway, my name is Megan. I am your emotionally intelligent bestie. And today I want to talk about a story that I think is going to hit home for many people. And it's the time when I thought I met my soulmate. So, as you all know, I do a lot of talking about avoidant attachment and what that looks like and how to navigate that and also how to heal from anxious attachment. But all of this knowledge did not just come from anywhere. First of all, I'm a Gemini. Master studier. So I have read books, I have been to courses, I have gone to school. I've done all of the things to study attachment theory, and not just attachment theory, but psychology and different neurological disorders as well, because that's kind of like my thing. And so I stepped into this journey, or I should say, this path of teaching attachment theory after I went through a discard with a fearful avoidant. Now, we talk about dismissive avoidants often and how hurtful and how painful they may be, but fearful avoidants, I do believe, are some of the most painful discards just because you are dealing with a person that would keep that relationship going on and on forever. And it's normally a person that you really love. The only person who turns it off or decides I can't take anymore is you. And so ultimately, that's what I went through. I was with a fearful avoidant, and it was one of the most beautiful relationships I ever had. We started out, it was a ton of chemistry. It was like we had lived the same life, except for separately. We got along with the same types of movies, the same songs, like our lifestyles, the relationships we had with our parents, even so much down to the specific point of both of us moving to California and our cars breaking down in the same city. Well, his car broke down in the same city. I got robbed in that city, but that's another story for another day. But still, there was so much parallel. Parallel? You know what I mean? There was so much of the same thing that was happening separately. And then when we got together, our first date lasted like 5 hours, 6 hours. I mean, we got kicked out of the restaurant because we were just still talking. That could also been because we were both Geminis. You know, Geminis, we are chitty chatty. But still, there was a ton of chemistry. And that relationship was really beautiful until it wasn't. So, when we think about anxious attachment, I want to tap into what anxiety actually looks like in relationships. Because before doing this work, when you would tell me I had anxiety, I would have looked at you like you had a horn growing out of your head. Because anxiety just was not a word that resonated with me. But anxiety shows up in many different ways. And if you're not used to sitting with the emotion of anxiety, then you probably won't even realize that you have it because you're keeping yourself busy to avoid from feeling it. So when I talk about that relationship that I had with the last avoidant that I dealt with, I had a ton of anxiety that was playing out that I wasn't even aware of. So let's just start from the beginning. The very first date, it went on for 4, 5 hours. We were talking about everything from some intimate stuff, traumatic things that had happened to us, to also things that we liked. Now, the entire time that I was with him, I kept thinking about, am I saying too much? Am I doing too much? Does he like me? Should I sit this way? I don't want to eat weird. Maybe I shouldn't eat that. I don't want to eat too much. Like, I was thinking about all of these things. That's anxiety. And I know that if anxiety isn't a word that you're used to hearing, then you might not be able to recognize it. But when you're sitting in front of somebody and you're putting an overemphasis on how you show up, then you're creating anxiety from the very beginning. Because when you're on a first date, you shouldn't be too concerned about how they are feeling about you. You need to be tapping in how you feel about them. So that's number one. Number two, as the relationship progressed, I noticed now many people respond to trauma differently. For me, it is always jumping to the future, but some people respond to trauma by remaining in the past. So as the relationship progressed, it was like I was in a hurry to move that relationship along. It was like I was already ready to make plans. Literally, our second date, we took a trip down to Tijuana. Okay. Like, I left the country with this man. Now, granted, we live in Southern California, so I mean, that was nothing but a 3 hour drive. But still, I crossed the border with a man that I did not know. That's what anxiety looks like. You're unable to remain present because the present is too frightening. The present feels too uncomfortable because the present has too many unknowns. So, if you find yourself in these connections and you're constantly trying to jump to the future, you're already trying to make plans for what the wedding's going to look like, then 9 times out of 10, you are showing up in that relationship anxious. Now, another major red flag that I overlooked, and this one isn't necessarily within myself, but this is within him. He was a pothead. Now, I say that in the most loving way because I gotta listen, I gotta be a straight shooter, but I'm also like, we're gonna call a spade a spade. He was a pothead. When you are dealing with someone that is displaying signs of addiction very early on, that is the biggest red flag that you can have. Whether it be them drinking, whether it be hardcore drugs, whether it is them constantly on video games, because let's talk about the addictions that aren't things that you ingest, right? Or if it is them smoking weed, anything that someone is doing compulsively, that is a red flag for someone who is avoidant because those compulsions are allowing them to escape the reality of their feelings. So while it may be very nice for you to have a glass of wine with your partner every night or smoke a joint every night. If this is happening all the time and you're realizing that this is actually a dependency, then there is something that you need to look into within that relationship. So going back to the relationship and the way that I showed up and also the way that he showed up in the very beginning, we both were infatuated with each other in like the most deepest way. He was changing his bank account to the bank that I was banking with. He changed his Wi-Fi service to the same one that I was with. It was like we had no problems truly merging our lives together while also remaining separately because we didn't move in with each other. We were buying each other household items, we were going shopping together. And all of this was within the first 2 or 3 months. So because all of this was happening, it allowed me to overlook some very telltale signs. Case in point, his mother came into town the same month that we met. And I remember asking my father, Daddy, do you think it's strange that he didn't introduce me to his mom? And my dad was like, ordinarily, no, because you all just met. But considering everything that you all have done together, yes. However, I wanted to lean towards it's been too early, and so I let that slide. But no, that is the first sign of inconsistency because why is someone willing to show up for you and do all of these things, but then they don't want to do this one thing? And we like to place more weight on what we consider the small things, but the reality is that when someone likes you and when someone is serious about you, they show up in every single area, every single aspect for you. They don't pick and choose where they want to be great when it comes to your relationship. So that was the first conversation that I avoided, and that's how anxiety can also play out. So when we think about anxiety, we always think about all of the things that we're doing to escape the anxiety. But in a relationship, there were a number of conversations that I just didn't have in order to avoid the feelings of rejection or the potential of this relationship ending. And I will never forget that there was one night, and I think maybe we had been together for like 2 or 3 months. This was a 5 month relationship, okay? So everything happened very quickly. But I had bought a game off of TikTok, and it was like one of those couple games where you ask the couple, you ask your partner questions and, whatever. And I pulled out the game and was like, hey, I found a game we could play. And this was the first time I experienced any kind of aggression with him. And it wasn't major, but it was like this very defensive, if you knew anything about me, then you know I would never play a game like that. And I was like, oh, okay, my bad. And I just put the game away. Now, looking back on that situation or looking back at that response, it wasn't so much that he wouldn't play a game, it was the visceral reaction that he had to it. That was a clue in that I'm dealing with someone who is emotionally unavailable. But young Megan, the Megan that didn't know any better, was just like, okay, so this is the one thing that we don't have in common. That's cool. But it's not cool because that was a game that would create some kind of intimacy within that person. And if I were emotionally available myself, then I would have recognized that, oh, this is not someone who's going to be able to emotionally meet my needs. Because while they looked at it as a game, to me, that's something that I enjoy when I'm in a relationship. Like, I enjoy doing cute little things like that. And that's not something that I'm willing to sacrifice on anymore. At one point, I was willing to sacrifice a lot of things. And honestly, that became the very first of many conversations that I refused to have with this man. Because as the relationship progressed, we took another vacation. We went to Napa Valley, and that was the first time I told him that I loved him. And I remember saying, I love you, and thinking, like, no, you don't. Like, I felt very strongly towards him and I was very happy in the relationship. Like, we had not really had any real issues, but I also knew that I didn't love this man. But there was something in me that just felt compelled to say it anyway. And once again, that is that anxiety pushing the relationship along. And I'm going to tell you, that when you're in these insecure relationships, especially if you are showing up anxiously attached, then there is a part of you that has to remain detached from your body. Because if you were completely dropped into your body, then you would feel all of these feelings of discomfort, and many of these relationships with avoidance would not last as long as they do. Now, I know that if you have not done a lot of the inner work, then that might not resonate enough with you because you're probably like, of course I can feel what's in my body. But when we think about the things that people do that make us feel uncomfortable, or the things that people say that don't quite sit right with us, if this is a connection that we want to remain in, then a part of us has to remain detached from our bodies. Because before we display any behavior towards what that person said or what that person did, there is a visceral reaction that we may have. It may be a beating heart, sweaty palms, maybe our face gets flushed, maybe there's a part of our body that tenses up, a number of things that are happening because trauma lives in the body. It does not live in the brain because the trauma happens before we even have rational thought. So when we think about healing trauma, it is because we are trying to connect it with our rationality. We're trying to bring it to our brain. But before we do the work, everything is visceral. So in that moment in Napa Valley, I told him I loved him. He didn't say it back, but at the same time, I still felt like it was coming, and eventually it did come. But honestly, and I have said this in other videos, and I will reiterate this, when the avoidant starts to show that vulnerability, that is when all hell breaks loose. That is literally the beginning of the downfall. Because the moment they say, I love you, or the moment they're like, let's move in together, or let's get married, or whatever. I mean, I'm saying marriage, but normally I don't get that far. But, whenever they make that leap of faith into the unknown of vulnerability, that is when they become present with what they are really feeling. So in the beginning, the a fearful avoidant especially, I cannot speak for dismissive avoidance in this video because A, I don't want to confuse you all, and B, dismissive avoidance show up very differently in the beginning. And I can give you a story time about the dismissive avoidant that I dealt with on another video. But for a fearful avoidant, the way that they show up in the beginning, they show up like they are securely attached. And I say that because you will probably be looking at it from an anxiously attached lens. Now, hindsight is always 2020, and I can look back and I can see where, yeah, there were a few moments where this guy definitely could have tricked me into believing that he was emotionally available, but there were also some very telltale signs where I should have rang the alarm and I just didn't. But anyway, fearful avoidance will show up in the beginning as securely attached for the anxious eye. And when he went on to tell me he loved me, which was maybe 2 weeks later, maybe 3 weeks later, I don't know. But when he showed up and told me that he loved me, it was like, yes. I got this. Everything I was feeling was right. It's time to move the relationship on. It was as if him telling me he loved me gave me the green light to go full force in the relationship. I was making plans for us to be together. I was making plans for us to get married. I was talking, every time I would go shopping and buy something, I would always buy two. And he was doing the same thing. But as I was doing all of this, moving the relationship along, I actually felt the resistance within myself. And that is the wild part about it. I will never forget me making a vision board. And on this vision board, and I like look over to the corner because I still have the vision board sitting on my desk. But me putting a ring in a woman, it was like a picture of a ring, and the woman was being proposed to in the background. And I put this picture on my vision board, and I just couldn't see it with him. And I don't know why I couldn't see it with him because he was the one I wanted to be with. Like, I was still very much in love with this man, but I just could not see it. However, the relationship was going along swimmingly. So it allowed me to ignore the fact that I couldn't see it. And I just chalked it up to I'm in my own head. Girl, you're overthinking this. This man already said he loves you. Give it time. Giving it time is literally the worst thing that you can do. Because if I can't tell you one thing that will stick with you in this video, I'm sorry. If I can tell you one thing that will stick with you in this video, it is this. When you have questions, ask them. Do not allow yourself to sit in silence. Do not allow yourself to overthink things. Do not allow yourself to draw your own conclusions because A, your conclusions are probably going to be wrong, and B, the person that wants to be with you is not going to feel bombarded by your questions. They're not going to feel overwhelmed by your anxiety. They're going to be able to hold that anxiety because, in all actuality, even when you heal anxious attachment, you still have anxiety. Anxiety is a natural emotion. It is an emotion that is necessary because anxiety keeps you safe. The issue happens is when the anxiety starts trying to keep you safe in situations where you don't need to be safe. You need to have fun. So when you have questions, ask them. Allow people to show up for you because while you can be in a relationship with someone who is maybe putting you on edge with their behavior, you're kind of keeping yourself on edge by your lack of behavior, or I should say lack of action. When you refuse to take action, you perpetuate your own anxiety. And that's pretty much what I did in that relationship because as I continued to look into the future and I continued to make all of these plans for when we were going to be together forever, there were little moments where he would say, "Would I really like my apartment and such?" Or, like he would throw in little things that kind of reaffirmed that he wasn't ready to move that far along. But I was so caught up in the fact that this was my man, my man, my man, that I was overlooking those little tidbits of information, those little clue ins that he was giving me to his own emotional landscape. And of course, as that relationship continued on, the arguments started to ensue, and I found myself having to keep quiet to keep the peace. And I would keep quiet even on situations where I knew I was right. And I knew that he was overreacting and that he was being a bit intolerant. And I just kept quiet because I kept hoping that the relationship would A, get back to the way it was. And I also kept holding on to how great of a man he was. To this day, there's still not really a bad thing I can say about him. I mean, don't get me wrong, this man broke my heart, but I can see where we both had a part to play in it. And when I think about him as a person, I think about him as an amazing person. Like if people ask me about him, I say he was great. I mean, I got sick and I ended up in the hospital, and without hesitation, he showed up, not just for me, but he stepped in and he took care of my daughter for me. He was taking her to school. I mean, he really, like, he showed up in every way that you would expect a partner to. But at the end of the day, he was not emotionally available. He did not have the emotional capacity to go the long haul, to go the distance in this relationship. And that's something that I want to tell anyone who is anxiously attached, dealing with an avoidant. And this truly could stand for if they are fearful or dismissive. When you say things like, everything about them is so great except for this one thing. Well, that one thing is the one thing that separates you all from being roommates to being lovers. So it's not just this one thing, it is the thing. How they are able to show up for you emotionally is probably the main thing that matters, because chemistry is something that can be built. Compatibility, however, is not. So that is something to keep in mind whenever you find yourself in these anxious, avoidant relationship situationships. Now, when I talk about the discard that I felt in that relationship, or I should say that I experienced in that relationship, it is very easy for me to say, oh, it came out of the blue, because while we had started to have more arguments, um, I did not think that we were going to break up. Like, I never actually thought that the relationship was going to end. But I'm going to tell you something, and this is how I know that we are just all connected. So, before the discard happened, I want to say maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks prior, I started to have anxiety attacks. Now, as I was telling you, I was not a girl that ever resonated with the word anxiety. Like, that just wasn't my reality. So when I started having these anxiety attacks, I did not know where they were coming from. And I knew that it was something very serious. And when I tell you these anxiety attacks, they were like, they would wake me up out of my sleep. My heart was racing. I couldn't stop thinking. I was feeling fidgety. I started sweating and I just could not get a grip. And so I initially thought that maybe it was something I was dreaming about. Because why am I waking up? I ain't even hit the floor yet, and my heart is pounding. So I started trying to really keep track of my dreams, but it wasn't my dreams. And then I started seeing a therapist. Well, I was already seeing a therapist, but I had my therapist recommend me to a psychologist. So I started seeing a psychologist. I'm like, I'm having these anxiety attacks. I don't know what's going on. And the psychologist started trying to help me decode, my behavior, things that was happening in my life, and we just could not get to the bottom of it. And then one thing happened. So I'm a flight attendant in my day-to-day life. And I left to go to our recurrent training. It's an annual training that we have to do to remain qualified as a flight attendant. And when I was on my way back from the training, I was sitting on the plane. Well, let me back up a little bit. Before I even got on the plane to come back, I was in the airport, and out of nowhere, I had the most major anxiety attack. I mean, I am sitting in the Dallas Fort Worth airport, and I had to call my mom because I had to go find a corner, and I was sitting on the floor, and I was like, "Ma, I don't know what's going on." I was like, "This anxiety, it's driving me crazy. I'm crying. I am completely losing my shit." This happened out of nowhere, you all. Like when I tell you it happened out of nowhere, I don't know what triggered this. Well, now I do, but back then I didn't know. And so my mom is like trying to calm me down, and she's like, "Well, Megan, what is like?" She's getting frustrated because she's like, "There's no way in hell you don't know why you're having a reaction like this." And I'm like, "Ma, I swear to you, I really don't know what's going on. Like, I am losing it right now. I don't think I can get on this plane." And I started thinking, am I foreshadowing? Like, am I seeing like there's something wrong with the plane? Or, what I started trying to think of everything that could be causing this anxiety attack. So, anyway, I end up getting on the plane. And as I start to land in LA, I had to text my ex, that we were landing. And boom, the anxiety started setting in. The heart was racing, the palms were sweating, and that was when I made the connection. Oh my God, I'm having anxiety because of him. That was my first, like, what in the what? Why would I be having anxiety because of him? So, anyway, I realized as I was messaging him that the anxiety was happening because of him. So, I don't say anything. And mind you, for weeks, I was going back and forth about if I should even tell him I was having the anxiety attack, which is also another red flag because you're experiencing something like this and you don't even feel comfortable enough to tell your partner, the one that you love. Like, come on now, this isn't something that you're supposed to deal with by yourself. So anyway, I make the connection and I'm like, okay, the anxiety is being caused by him. Now we got to figure out what's going on. Meet him. He puts my bags in the car. We sit in the car. I kid you not, we did not even leave the airport. And the first thing he says is, "Megan, I'm really struggling in this relationship." Heart is racing, the anxiety is full force, and that is when it all made sense. I foreshadowed, my body had sensed the separation, the impending separation of this relationship. That is the way that our body speaks to us. Now, mind you, I was a woman that was very detached from her body, where I could not even recognize anxiety. So I do believe that I had to start having these panic attacks because otherwise it wouldn't have gotten my attention. I would not have known what was going on. But when I started having those panic attacks 2 weeks later, now looking back, that was when I started to feel him pulling away. And it was little things. It was like the good morning messages were starting to become later and later. Us talking throughout the day was starting to become more and more sporadic. I remember we went on a hike, and the entire hike, he was damn near, 6, 7 feet in front of me the entire time. And I remember thinking, like, damn, it feels like I'm on a hike by myself. So there were all of these little things that were happening that I refused to acknowledge, but my body was recognizing it as this feels familiar. And that's the way a lot of these relationships happen. So sometimes the reactions that you're having are so subtle, or I don't want to say that they're so subtle, but you're so detached that you're not able to recognize them until it is so intense that you are forced to be present. And that was what that anxiety attack in the airport was showing me. Like, it's happening. The abandonment, the rejection, because now I know, like, I wasn't abandoned or rejection. This man just had issues with vulnerability, but all of that is getting ready to come to a head. That is how our bodies tell us that we are no longer safe. Or I don't want to say safe, but we are beginning to experience something that feels familiar. So, I said all that to say this is that I feel like there is no better teacher than lived experience. And as much as we want to feel like, oh, we're separated and we experience different things, attachment theory is based upon people literally doing the same stuff in relationships. Now, granted, there are personality traits to consider. There are different emotional upbringings to consider. There are even cultural differences to consider. But at the end of the day, when a person is experiencing these overwhelming feelings of anxiety, or when they are uncomfortable in close quarters in relationships, a lot of the behaviors are the same. So going back to that day, that was when I knew that the relationship was over. I went to his house, gathered all of my things, and I was literally shaking as I was walking down the steps. And I was like really trying to hold my composure, but deep down, I was really falling apart. The anxiety had hit ahead. And I was that girl. I did not just walk away from that relationship. I continued to see that man for 2 months after that as friends with benefits, but I thought that eventually he would see how great we were together and we would be able to get back together. And obviously, it doesn't work that way. Like when you're with an avoidant, the best of them that you get is in the beginning of the relationship. They could see you as an amazing person, and I'm sure they do. Like, there is no doubt in my mind that my avoidant ex still sees me as a great person, but he does not see me as a person that he can be with, because one of the things that he told me as we were as he was ending the relationship is that you don't know how bad I wish I could be the man that you need to be. Do you realize how much power is in that statement? That is someone that is truly at war with themselves. And that is something that I want you to keep in mind, that while you may be dealing with an avoidant that may not be able to communicate their feelings into that degree, those are the things that they feel. They want to be the person that can show up for you. They don't want to feel like they are letting such an amazing person go. So understand, it is never about you. You think it's about you because you've made the entire relationship about them. But keep in mind, the entire relationship for them was always about self. It was never about you. It was always about how much of me can I keep to myself while remaining with this person. And if they're dealing with someone who wants the future, wants the happily ever after, then that is something that's going to trigger them much quicker, because avoidance can't see that far into the future, because that far into the future requires a level of commitment of which they just don't know, and they also don't feel comfortable with. So I'll end the story. I get all the time, did you ever hear from this person again? And the answer is no. There were a few times where I reached out because no contact was never my forte. But I got silence and I got more heartbreak. There was one time where I got a random phone call from him, but it was like a butt dial, so I don't really consider that making contact. But no, when you are with someone and the chemistry is so amazing and you feel like you all were really the perfect couple, and they discard that, then 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to hear from them again, because they felt the perfection as well. And the perfection is exactly what scared them. And when a person is aware enough to know that they cannot show up for you in the way of which you deserve to be shown up for, the best thing that they can do for you is stay away, especially if they have no intentions on loving you correctly. My name is Megan. It was such a pleasure being extremely vulnerable with you all and telling my story. If you made it this far, please let me know in the comments some of your stories with your fearful avoidant exes or your fearful avoidant partners now. I would love to hear from you. And until next time, I will see you later.